morning and welcome to the electronic seminar series on social policy. We're very fortunate to have with us today Professor Michael Noble from the Centre for the Analysis of South African Social Policy at the University of Oxford. Welcome, Michael.
Today I'm going to be talking about multiple deprivation in South Africa. In particular, I'm going to be talking about a project which we recently completed to design an index of multiple deprivation at a small area level for South Africa using data from the 2001 census.
And he argued that your chances of being poor varied across your life cycle, that poverty was dynamic, that when you were young, a newborn baby, you were unlikely on average to be poor. But as you got to about 5 and grew, the family, because it cost more to feed the children as they grew up, was likely, if they were close to the poverty line, to slip below. And it wasn't until the children were 14 or so and able to start working, you could work at 14 in the UK in those days, that the family would then have a sufficient income to raise itself above the primary poverty line.
Secondly, in the liberal interpretation, the liberal welfare regime, there is a tendency towards the idea that social rights are special rights for the poor, a special form of protection. So the emphasis there is on forms of social assistance or social safety nets, if you like, for the needy members of society, while everybody else looks after themselves.
Here's an individual looking at his income over time. Might be a man, might be a woman. What we see is that for most of their lives, their income is considerably higher than their adequacy. Income is greater than needs. But at that one spell, marked in pink on the side, you see that resources fall short of needs. A situation where the individual is in poverty, or at least very close to being in poverty. In this case, this individual spends a long period of time, A to B on the slide, where his resources are greater than his needs. That opens up the possibility that he or she could save and then draw down on those savings so that it's possible when the crisis occurs that those savings can be used to prevent somebody falling into poverty. Personal savings. It's what we do all the time. Moving resources from when we're apparently fairly rich to situations when we're falling short of income. Moving income across our own lives, borrowing from ourselves to pay back later.
And in the last 10 years, both of these goals we're much nearer achieving, with longer periods of daycare provided by the state and other agencies, the extension of children's education, at least part-time, from the age of 3. So in that sense, one of these goals has been deepened and extended on a more universal scale.
The other part of it, of course, is that citizens, in the context of a total war, were equally affected by war. So, for example, in Britain you had the rationing of food and the evacuation of citizens consequent of the bombings, which contributed to social levelling in the society. And how did it contribute to social levelling in the society? Well, for the first time you had middle class and working class people both being bombed by Nazi Germany, having to occupy, for example, the underground train stations, which are called the tubes. And for the first time, working class and middle class people saw their social lives from a vantage point other than the one that they had found themselves in the pre-1939 period, which of course was for the working class associated with this urban poverty.
In my professional work, I'd started, my main first book was on the family life of old people, where I interviewed people in Bethnal Green in East London who were living in all sorts of circumstances. And I decided after that I hadn't looked at the minority who were committed to institutions, either hospitals or residential homes, and decided I ought to study that as a subject. That human rights legislation is desperately needed today. And if we can just use it to remember that on the one hand, we're experiencing disasters and inequality. But on the other, more and more people are showing their agreement to these general values and rights. We've got to bring the two together, and that for me is the biggest strategic question of all at the present time.
Thank you, Professor Townsend. We were very privileged to be able for you to spend some time with us here today and take time out of your very, very busy schedule to give us some thoughts and some inspiration on social policy, covering the various areas of social policy, and ultimately as social policy as purposive social action to change society in more egalitarian directions. And we very much hope that this is the start of a dialogue and a further and continued contribution to developing the paradigm of social policy in South Africa. And we much wish you the best in your work for developing countries, including in South Africa. So thank you.
Thank you
and
for inviting me.
Pleasure. And that concludes our seminar on social policy and poverty in the electronic seminar series. Thank you.